This hearing is called the Capitol Insurrection. Let's be honest with the American people. It was not an insurrection, and we cannot call it that and be truthful. The Cambridge English Dictionary defines an insurrection as, and I quote, an organized attempt by a group of people to defeat their government and take control of their country, usually by violence. And then from the Century Dictionary, the act of rising against civil authority or governmental restraint, specifically the armed resistance of a number of persons to the power of the state. As one of the members who stayed in the Capitol and on the House floor, who, with other Republican colleagues, helped barricade the door until almost 3 p.m. that day from the mob who tried to enter, I can tell you the House floor was never breached, and it was not an insurrection. This is the truth. There was an undisciplined mob. There were some rioters and some who committed acts of vandalism. But let me be clear, there was no insurrection, and to call it an insurrection, in my opinion, is a bold-faced lie. Watching the TV footage of those who entered the Capitol and walked through Statuary Hall showed people in an orderly fashion staying between the stanchions and ropes, taking videos and pictures. You know, if you didn't know the TV footage was a video from January the 6th, you would actually think it was a normal tourist visit. There were no firearms confiscated from anyone who breached the Capitol. Also, the only shot fired on January the 6th was from a Capitol police officer who killed an unarmed protester, Ashley Babbitt, in what will probably eventually be determined to be a needless display of lethal force. We heard earlier that her death certificate ruled her death to be a homicide. You know, but the only insurrection that I have witnessed in my lifetime was the one conducted by members of the FBI with participants from the DOJ and other agencies under the banner Russia, Russia, Russia. High-ranking employees from these federal agencies and members of an independent council coordinated and fed a false narrative for over 2 years that the 2016 election was stolen and illegitimate. Democrats were on the news almost every night saying the evidence is there, and the mainstream media amplified the fake news. This was indeed a very coordinated and well-funded effort by a determined group of people to overthrow our duly elected president, Donald J. Trump.
When I see this sheet on our timeline and on the, let's see, okay, at 2:07, a mob of Trump supporters breached the steps. I don't know who did a poll that is Trump supporters. You had the media saying the same thing, just like you had the media saying Officer Sicknick was killed with a fire extinguisher, which he was not. But I don't know who did the poll to say that they were Trump supporters. I do know this, those that were on the grounds that saw were actually there. Midway of President Trump's speech, you had a group that got together, had armed gear, helmets, flak jackets, other things. They had an intention. They had planned this, and so really we're not getting. This is just we're going through the motions to blame a president who has had no reason. He had thousands of people there. Those that breached the Capitol were intended to do damage.
There we go. I would like to take some time to comment on how the media and the many Democrats have put forth a narrative that has been circulating around since January 6th and has never been corrected. For example, the narrative that President Trump incited riots on January 6th. I don't even understand, Madam Chair, why you yourself don't speak the truth as to what President Trump actually stated. And what he said on the morning of January 6th, he said that I know that every one of you will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard today. Madam Chair, why don't you talk about how the president used those words to peacefully and patriotically instead of cherry picking words that you want to use to portray an image of something that did not happen.
19 people died during BLM riots last year. Hundreds and hundreds were injured. 2,000 police officers were injured from BLM riots last year. And yet, we're going to discuss today, as if none of that happened, the events of January the 6th. The hypocrisy of this body is indeed disturbing to the scores of millions of Americans that supported President Trump and love this country and have been denied access to their own capital for over a year.
Same question. How much do you feel like the well has been poisoned here? I mean, we've had so much fake news, cynical politicians, disinformation, far from the truth. I mean, we heard that Officer Sicknick was killed by a fire extinguisher in the riot, but indeed he died by natural causes, a stroke. In fact, that was put out by the DC Medical Examiner. How much of an impact do you think social media and other outlets had on an investigation?
Congresswoman, I have no idea, but I think you highlight a very, very important fact. And that's what I was trying to highlight that the gentleman from California attacked me for. Some people are doing it against us very effectively, and we need to figure out how to manage this and how to bring about some needed change.
Yes, I think they call that fake news. Mr. Rosen, do you classify the events of January 6th as a riot or an insurrection, one or the other?
I say whatever you call it. It was an outrage. It was unconscionable. It was intolerable. I've heard it called both of those things. I just think we all have to agree that this is something we can never allow to happen again. All those phrases are fine, but what really counts is the conduct is something we cannot tolerate to ever occur again. And I just hope that one of the things that people take away is greater respect for the Constitution and the rule of law.
Thank you. Mr. Miller, the events of January 6th, do you classify them as a riot or an insurrection?
I'm not a lawyer. It was bad regardless. I saw it as an assault on the Capitol and assault on our Constitution.
Outright propaganda and lies are being used to unleash the national security state against law-abiding U.S. citizens, especially Trump voters. The FBI is fishing through homes of veterans and citizens with no criminal records and restricting the liberties of individuals that have never been accused of a crime. Mr. Biden calls January 6th the worst attack since the Civil War. A president was impeached for his alleged role in that riot. It was reported early, totally unconfirmed, that an armed insurrection, quote, beat a police officer to death with a fire extinguisher. The government has even enlisted Americans to turn in their own neighbors. Federal prosecutor Michael Sherwin on CBS News 60 Minutes continued the, quote, shock and awe, end of quote, strategy. Many of my Democrat colleagues oppose the, quote, shock and awe, end of quote, strategy in Iraq. We should similarly oppose its application against American citizens. Don't take the hero lightly. He did heroically, but he died of natural causes. Mr. Rosen, was a single individual at or outside the Capitol on January 6th, have they been charged with the crime of insurrection?
Again, if you're asking me about charges that were either made, pending, or being investigated,
Mr. Rosen,
I'm sorry, I'm just not in a
again,
position to address those.
Once again, Mr. Rosen, to my knowledge, not a single person has been charged with a crime of insurrection.
Hey. There's a difference between marching on the Capitol and assaulting the Capitol.
You may answer.
Democrats have said the events of the Capitol on January 6th were an assault on our democracy. And if that's true, if disorderly conduct in a restricted building is an assault on democracy, then what do we call setting fire to a federal court in Portland, Oregon, where people inside, what do we call that? For a year, we watched riots in our American cities, and House Democrats have remained silent or actually supported the violence. The federal courthouse in Portland was under attack every night, and Democrats said nothing. And I'd like it. Please play video number 1. I think you can stop the tape now. Thank you. Stop the video now. Thank you.